I'm increasingly concerned about the value or the lack of value that's placed on human life. I think there's a cheapening of human life. So much of the narrative at the moment, it seems to me, is about treating the present population, those alive now, with contempt, and imagining that there were two things: that the planet is more important than us, and here's the bit that's particularly, I would say, questionable, that people not yet born, people who may or may not exist in the centuries ahead, are more important than the people that are clinging on to existence right this very moment. I think that's anti-human. I think that's immoral. Suggesting to people alive today that they matter less than people who might exist in some sort of idealised, carbon neutral, net zero future is a profound wrong. That if it's not admitted to, if it's not challenged, if it's not overturned, then I genuinely think that nothing but bad news lies ahead for millions, if not hundreds of millions, if not billions of people. We're being held hostage for the betterment of the future. Once again, the elites are working towards and contemplating some kind of utopia. Utopia, I say again, is a word that literally means nowhere. It means a place that doesn't exist. But nonetheless, that's what all the agendas are about at the moment. They're determined, though, to take control of everyone's lives, to micromanage every moment of everyone's day. They're working towards doing that primarily via control of finance, control of people's money, but fear and shaming. There's life shaming going on at the moment. If you're alive today, you're part of the problem, seems to be the message. And the tragedy is that the objectives that underpin all of this are unachievable. Agenda 2030 and a net zero, getting us to the point where no one on Earth, no country on Earth produces carbon dioxide, presumably other than that which they exhale as a consequence of breathing, as a consequence of respiration. Even the Biden administration, Joe Biden's administration in the US, admits that even if all the governments of the world were to keep to their promises into an indefinite future, it will take more than 200 years to achieve what they describe as net zero. 200 years. It's also all predicated on a lie that CO2 is some kind of toxin, that it's some kind of poison. Now, obviously, if you trap yourself in a room with a diesel generator running, the build-up of gases will end your life. And if you get an excess mix of CO2 in a confined space, it's a problem. But CO2 is 0.04% of the atmosphere. The 70-odd% of the atmosphere is nitrogen. The other big chunk is oxygen, and some inert gases and CO2 are down there in the infinitesimal, 0.04. And of that 0.04%, human activity produces a fraction, or affects a fraction of that 0.04%. In reality, CO2 is plant food, and CO2 has been generally in decline in the Earth's atmosphere for millions of years. The human species may be affecting the levels of CO2, but even if we are, the stark fact remains that without CO2 in the atmosphere, there's no photosynthesis. The green plants can't exist, and without the green plants, there's no herbivores, so there's nothing for us to eat. So without CO2, we all die. So the whole push at the moment, the way in which people's lives are being immiserated, people are being excessively taxed, and now we're going into a winter where people can't afford to heat their homes in winter, and they can't afford to feed themselves because of policies around reducing nitrogen and the rest of the nonsense that's empowering those listening to the World Economic Forum and other authorities to contemplate reducing farming around the world by between 30 and 50%. So people are starving to death. People are going to freeze to death. Cold deaths on account of the cold outnumber deaths caused by excessive heat by a factor of something like 20 to 1. 20 times as many people die of the cold every year. There was a piece published by Lancet that found that each year 600,000 people die from heat, but 4.5 million die of the cold every year. Every year, 4.5 million people die of the cold. And yet, the policies that are being put in place are going to force people in this country, Britain, a first world country, people are going to die. Thousands of people are going to die as a consequence of the cold, as a consequence of what the cold does to their health. Babies, children, people who are ill with other conditions, the elderly, all of them are being put at risk deliberately by these policies. And I say that this is anti-human. There's a piece in the newspapers this week saying that Britain has signed a deal with the US to import twice as much natural gas, as we did in 2021. So they've doubled the order. And the gas in question is produced by fracking in the United States. Now, Liz Truss, poor old Liz Truss, she was contemplating lifting the ban on fracking in the UK. There's estimates that there's something like between 50 and 100 years worth of natural gas waiting to be released by fracking in this country. 50 to 100 year supply that would drop the price of heating through the floor. But we're not allowed to have that. And instead, at a premium, at an excessive cost, we are paying, the British taxpayers are going to buy twice as much fracked gas from the US as we did last year in a bid to keep the lights on. I mean, the Biden administration's played a blinder. It definitely makes you wonder about the sabotage of Nord Stream 2. I mean, let's just objectively have a look around and see who stands to benefit from Nord Stream 2 and the sabotage thereof. And in the next breath say that Britain has now signed up to buy billions of cubic metres of liquefied natural gas fracked out of American rock, while in the same breath saying that we won't do that because it's bad for the environment. So all the British government has done is outsource our responsibility our so-called responsibility to carbon reduction and net zero. We're still going to be burning natural gas. It's just that we're going to be burning natural gas that's been obtained by the Americans, fracking for it. While our politicians can posture about the planet about the fact that we're not doing that here. As I've said many times before, hypocrisy, is nowhere near being a big enough word to describe it. It's anti-human. Anti-human is the agenda. It goes all the way up to transhumanism. This objective that floats about without enough people paying attention to it. This idea of blending the natural human with technology, and it's sold as something that's going to help the quadriplegics to walk again, or it's going to cure blindness and all the rest of it. And I'm sure that's hypothetically the case, but ultimately, I promise you this: it's about putting something into the human organism that will facilitate external control of the human organism at some point in the future. And that objective, this idea that we need to be updated, is based fundamentally on the fact that a narrow elite believes that human beings aren't good enough. World Economic Forum preacher Yuval Noah Harari is on record saying that the mass of the population are just useless eaters. Now, who gets to decide which eaters are useless? I mean, objectively speaking, what makes Yuval Noah Harari a useful eater? What makes Klaus Schwab a useful eater? And who sits in judgment on who of the rest of the 8 billion people are useless? So it's predicated, this transhumanism, this idea that we need to be augmented, that we need to be fused with technology in order to come up to scratch, is an expression of a manifestation of the new reality, which is the elites don't think we're good enough as we are. It's not enough to be human and alive. You've got to have some bit of kit, some silicon chip shoved into the back of your head to elevate you to the point where you become a useful eater, or at least not a useless eater. And I'm always in the business of looking back at the past at times like this. Now, 2,500 years ago, Sophocles was writing plays, and he wrote a play called Antigone, or he wrote a play around the Antigone legend. The Antigone legend is not his, but he wrote a play about it. And there's a line in it: "Let be the future, mind the present need, and leave the rest to whom the rest concerns. Present tasks claim our care. The ordering of the future rests where it should rest." And Sophocles wrote that 2,500 years ago. Basically, that we should be attending to the present need, and we should leave the future where it belongs. There's another way in which the sentiment is translated: tomorrow is tomorrow. Future cares have future cures, and we must mind today. The lesson that was understood 2,500 years ago surely is that it's the people who are alive today who are first in the queue for our attention, for our care, and that people who have not yet been conceived, far less been born, have to take second place to those who are alive today and requiring food and heat and shelter and love and respect. And I was reading, there's a horrifying thing last year in Canada. Canada, when I was growing up, Canada was like a bastion of freedom, liberal thinking. I've got I've got relatives who emigrated to Canada 40, 50 years ago now, and children and grandchildren and great grandchildren have been born out there ever since. And there was a long time where we would think, back here in Scotland, back here in the UK, from time to time our thoughts would be tinged with envy about the fact that they were out there in that vast territory where everything, freedom, to entertain your every whim, it seemed, was in Canada. Well, not anymore. Canada under Justin Castro is enthralled to totalitarianism. Neo-communism has taken over in Canada. And I was reading that last year, in excess of 10,000 people, that's 3% of all deaths, ended their lives via euthanasia. Okay? State-approved suicide. End of life. 10,000 people in Canada. 3% of all deaths. And that was up a third. That was up 30-odd% on the year before. And it's going to keep on rising. There was the story, it was hinging around a Canadian Army veteran, a woman. She was wounded, and she's since become a Paralympian. Her name's Christine Gauthier. And she had been asking for a ramp at her home for her wheelchair, a bit of kit to make her life easier. And in 2019, a Canadian official, wrote her and said that if life was so difficult, if she was desperate, the government would help her kill herself. The government would help her kill herself. She says, "I have a letter saying that if you're so desperate, madam, we can offer you medical assistance in dying." This is a Paralympian, a Canadian Paralympian who wanted a ramp for her wheelchair. And there's other cases of military veterans who've been... It was in the Daily Mail. The story was in the Daily Mail, and 5 military veterans. There's an investigation going on, but it seems something like 5 more vets in the Canadian military veterans were offered assisted euthanasia, and it's going to get worse in Canada because it's now moving towards, it's going to allow people to opt for euthanasia for mental health reasons only. I mean, remember when Dignitas and the rest of it was for people who were in the most desperate, degenerative, incurable conditions, and now Canada is contemplating letting you opt for suicide if you're a bit sad. Depression is going to be grounds for... Imagine how many people... Depression, as we understand it, imagine if people in that condition who feel there's nothing left to live for are being nudged by health experts to opt for euthanasia. I mean, what kind of devaluing of human life is motivating that kind of thinking? Canada is also... It hasn't done it yet, but it's almost certainly going to go for offering it to what they call mature minors, i.e. children under the age of 18. Now, I find that beyond frightening and beyond sinister. It's beyond evil. Well, no, you can't get beyond evil, can you? It's evil. And it's all part of a pattern. It's all simply part of a pattern that is failing to acknowledge the sanctity of human life. You know, the Hippocratic Oath is about first do no harm, and with or without the Hippocratic Oath, medicine for the longest time has been about prolonging life, not shortening it. And yet here we are, where this alternative is being contemplated. And I say again, we usually look back on the past as though it was a time of barbarity, but think again about the fact that Sophocles, more than 2,000 years ago, was able to point out rightly that the future lies where the future lies, and that it's our obligation as human beings to attend to the present need, to deal with those people who are alive and in need today. And we have moved away from that because our governments, with the World Economic Forum and other thinking groups whispering in their ears all the time, are manifesting this notion that the human beings alive today are not good enough, that they are somehow expendable, and that all efforts should be made to prioritise the future planet and the population as yet unborn. And if that isn't anti-human and evil, I'm listening to hear exactly what is.